podcast that you're listening to is being presented to you with the cooperation of the SJ Network. If you're a person who needs a publicist and you want to appear on podcasts, contact Stephen Joyner at s-j-network.com. Let's get on with the show.
Welcome to the Season 8 wrap-up of Too Many Podcasts. On behalf of the Sherpalution studio players, thank you for listening. If you've missed any episodes before this, they are on your podcast app or on Sherpalution.com.
Also, if you can, please leave the show a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. This way, we can trick more people into listening.
Let's get started with Too Many Podcasts. A podcast that truly appreciates you being devious on our behalf.
Attention, rebels of the Sherpalution. Today's podcast is brought to you by Audible. We would like to give you a free audiobook download and 30-day free trial, simply by heading to www.audibletrial.com/Sherpa. There are over 180,000 titles of audiobooks and podcasts, including this one, to choose from for your iPhone, Android, Kindle, or MP3 player. And now, the one and only Mr. Bruce will lead you into the Sherpa Chalet. As a reminder, our award-winning customer service department is fully trained to ignore you and any of your silly questions.
Welcome to Too Many Podcasts, the podcast about podcasts. Now, podcasting from the Sherpa Chalet on Mount Podcastia, here's your host, Jim, the podcast Sherpa.
Hello there, rebels of the Sherpalution. Welcome to Too Many Podcasts. It is the podcast about podcasts and so much more. And you are listening to me, Jim, the podcast Sherpa. Welcome to Mount Podcastia, where we get to talk about podcasts. And this is the wrap-up, the last flight out for Season 8, as they call it. Well, that's what I'm calling it. I'm running out of names for these season wrap-ups. And today we will be acknowledging some wonderful people, including you, the listener, and a couple of other special people who have been on the show and made it so worthwhile for you to listen to. And we're going to talk about the podcasts that were recommended this season, and of course, our brand new feature, Sherpa Samples. And guess what's featured on our Sherpa Samples? I got requests. That's right, requests, which is what you can do if you want me to sample a podcast. But we'll get to that in a little bit. So we are here at the end of Season 8. And if you are brand new to the show and you're listening for the first time, where you been? Welcome along. There are plenty of places for you to go to catch up to Season 8 if you like. And you could start with my website, Sherpalution.com. All the episodes are there from the very, very start, along with some side projects that I've done, Too Many 80s songs, and The Expert Factory. It's all there, rebels, all there. And along with that, also, there is a link to the Sherpa shop if you would like to buy some Sherpa merchandise at the lovely TeePublic. That's available for you. And also, if you'd like to make a donation to the show, we have a tote board, and that tote board says... Oh, no, we better not say that. Okay. But you can make a donation if you like. You don't have to. There are other ways that you can help spread the word of the Sherpalution. First thing you can do is, after you're done listening, go to Apple Podcasts or even Spotify, and you can leave a review. So if you leave a 5-star review and say, hey, I like this podcast, maybe more and more people will be interested in hearing what is being said on this show, and I hope you can do that. I can't keep leaving positive reviews for myself. People will think, what is the matter with that boy? I don't know yet. I haven't figured that out. It's been some time. And also, what you can also do from the website, or if you're listening on a computer, you can share these episodes on social media. And there's usually a share button, and you just click it, and you can share it to Twitter or Instagram or Facebook, any place that you have friends who might be fascinated by that, and just let them know that it's something that the Sherpa created and it's something that you enjoy listening to. I would really appreciate it if you can do something like that. That's probably the best way for things to go viral, by letting others know about it when you can and sharing that information. Thank you very much to those of you who plan on doing it right after this show, or maybe after the next show, because there will be a season 9, of course, but we have to talk about season 8 first. Who do I always thank first? You, the listeners, for coming back week after week and checking the show out, and all the amazing guests that I have on it. And we have to thank, of course, Mr. Bruce for his little voiceovers, and of course, the mighty publicist extraordinaire, Stephen Joyner, for helping me get these guests on the show. Steve has been a huge help from, I think, season 2 or 3 onward. And he just isn't letting up. That guy, the guy's amazing. He's moved to the East Coast and he's working just as hard. And if you know somebody who'd like to be on a podcast, who maybe has some sort of a talent, or if they were an entertainer or a podcaster, you can actually get in touch with Steve through his website at s-j-s-j-s. It's in the beginning of the show. Just go back and listen to this all over again. Anyway, let's do a little bit of acknowledgement for the folks who came on this season. We will start with the folks who didn't have the podcasts, and then we will cover the folks in the podcasts in Sherpa Suggestions. So the first guest of the season 8 Sherpa Screening Room was actor Michael Lloyd, and he was followed by dog trainer Kim Hawkinson. And we had a whole bunch of authors this season, and they wrote all sorts of different kind of books. We got to speak with Lisa Zarina Michaud, and she was the lady who lives in France who actually contacted me and reached out and said, I'd like to be on your show. And I said, come on down. She did the thing, and we had a lot of fun, and I really appreciate her coming on down. Thank you, Lisa. And we also had Kristen Stovall and Joel Carroll, who wrote the book of Joel. We also spoke to director and actor Michael Baker and author Neil Getzlow of the book Unmasked. We also spoke to CJ and Larissa Julianis, the folks behind The Adventures of Mistress Maneater. That was a fun movie if you haven't caught it on Amazon or your favorite streaming service. We also got to talk to comedian Keith Ross Nelson, comedian hypnotist John Moyer, author Allison Church, actor Travis Dunn, actor and director John Anthony, and we got a repeat visit from Mr. Dale Niehaus, who came by once more, and he's got some stuff going on that we let you know about. And finally, we wrapped it up with newscaster and author Jennifer Vaughn, who wrote the book Made in Hollywood. Thank you to all of you for coming on the show and for spending a little time in the Sherpa Screening Room. Hope you've enjoyed those episodes. Now, what about those other ones? We've got folks who are doing podcasts, and how do we talk about them? We talk about them in Sherpa Suggestions.
And now it's time for Sherpa Suggestions.
So just in case you missed it, we like to recommend the podcasts of the guests that come on the show that have podcasts. So that's what Sherpa Suggestions is all about. And we had a bunch. I think we kind of split it down the middle between the Sherpa Screening Room and Too Many Podcasts. But we've got some podcasts to recommend. And here we go. We started things off with my buddy Ben Shrewsbury with 2 Marks and a Spark. And that is a wrestling podcast. My other buddy, Kristian, and the Random Kristian Show. I had so much fun talking with him. So many impressions. And we also spoke to Gabe, Cymbalista of Cymbalistic Cynicism. And he's part of a podcast network where you can hear his show. And then we did a really powerful interview with Mr. David Keck of the Surviving Abuse podcast. And he got to share his story of surviving a male sexual assault. We also got to speak to Paul Maglietta of the Misfit faction, and that's another podcast network, and he's got a bunch of shows there, and they talk about movies, and they talk about books, and they talk about action heroes and superheroes, and it's a lot of fun stuff. I really enjoyed having him on here. He was a super enthusiastic guest. Definitely check out his show. And this lady was really interesting too. We talked to Esther Brzezinski of Esther's Breeze, and she's in her 60s already and doing a podcast, and she's amazing, so you should definitely check her show out. We also spoke to Daniel Poppy Gonzalez of Dannylize This, and one of my favorites for the season, the Skeptic Metaphysicians, and we spoke to Will and Karen. I had a great time with them. Those guys were a blast. We gotta talk again. I think we gotta hook up a return with that episode. We also spoke to another favorite, Pete Turner of the Break It Down show. Pete was the ex-Army spy who's had a whole mess of shows. He's been doing it for like 10 years. And lastly, we talked to the guys from the You Hate to See It podcast, Nick and Jeff. And there's a third guy named Adam, who unfortunately wasn't in the interview, but he's on that show too, so check it out. So you got a whole bunch of podcasts right there for you to check out, folks. But wait a minute, that's not enough. No, that's not enough, because that will take us into our next segment, and it is called Sherpa Samples.
We're on that internet thingy at Sherpalution.com.
Oh, I know, you just can't get that song out of your head. I know. So I figured to make this a special 8-season ending, I actually got some requests for podcasts to investigate, and investigate I did. The first one I got was from a lady named Deborah, who works on an app called Swell, and I highly recommend this app. It's a social app when you basically communicate, and you leave little recordings, and you respond to people, and you have conversations. It doesn't happen in real time, but it's pretty cool, though. You can open up a lot of different topics, and, everybody's very respectful, and I put it out there saying, hey, does anybody have any podcasts that they'd like me to check out? And Deborah was the first one to respond. And her choice was Sway. So Sway was hosted by a lady named Kara Swisher, and they call her Silicon Valley's most feared and most well-liked journalist. And a lot of the episodes that she does, they have a little bit of a political bend, and there are interviews. I sampled her interview with Jimmy Kimmel, who is a late-night TV talk show host. They're really interesting stuff, and it did have a political bend, but I like the tone of it. She's a really great interviewer. I think you might enjoy it, especially if you like the view of the New York Times. And also a very special thanks to Arish, who suggested Sean Carroll's Mindscape. Now, Mindscape is kind of heady. They get into a lot of deep topics, but he's a really good interviewer, so he keeps it simple for the listener, and he talks to a lot of really fascinating and smart people. And the episode that I listened to was an interview with a scientist named Franz de Waal, and he talked about culture and gender in primates. And it was really cool stuff, very heady, but again, you could follow along with it. You could understand what they were talking about. The questions were probably questions that I think a lot of people would have asked, and this was a really fascinating stuff. So if you're into like science and metaphysics, Anish called it kind of a geeky show, but I like the word heady. I guess if I were going to choose one, it's a lot of deep conversations about stuff that you probably don't expect to hear about on podcasts. There are things about like quantum physics and technology, Darwin's theory of evolution and genetics and all sorts of stuff like that. The episodes are about an hour or so long. They have monthly wrap-ups that are like 3 hours. So if you want to listen to those, make sure you got a little bit of time on your hands. And, it's still all enjoyable stuff. I guess they compile everything together for the 3-hour episodes. So thank you both, Anish and Deborah, for your suggestions. And I did sample them, and definitely worth checking out. So what else have I been listening to? The thing is, when I sample certain podcasts, keep in mind, I only do one episode of the show, unless I really like it or I get into it for some reason and I have a little extra time. There are some that I am not the intended target audience for. So I don't want to bash something that wasn't geared towards me in the first place. I think that's only fair. Because hopefully other podcasters would do the same when it comes to too many podcasts. So let me talk about some of those first. And if maybe you fall into that demographic, maybe these are podcasts that you might be interested in. There was Full Send, and that's with a show with three guys, and they talk a lot of politics and pop culture. It seems to be geared toward a younger audience. I felt very old listening to this. Their interview was with Paulie D of the Jersey Shore, and some of the topics, I don't know. They were questions that I probably wouldn't ask my guests and haven't asked my guests in over 200 episodes, but they do it and people like it, so that's fine. Think about Paulie D. You notice that him and Donald Trump are never in the same room, and they both have a thing about tans. They both have a thing about the hair. Maybe they are one in the same. I don't know, just something to think about. And there's also Anything Goes with Emma Chamberlain. Emma Chamberlain was a YouTube star, and they gave her a podcast. And she's just basically speaking her mind. Again, probably geared towards Gen Zs, millennials, younger people. In that vein, I couldn't really relate to it. But again, if you are in that demographic, maybe it might be something that you might want to listen to. Also, they had the Always Sunny podcast. Now, this is for fans of the TV show It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia, which is on an American television. I've never seen an episode of it, so I know that these three guys were actors in the show. They were very funny. But, if you don't see the show, it's kind of hard to relate to exactly what they're talking about, and the backstories don't mean anything to you. But if you are a fan of It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia, check out the Always Sunny podcast. Okay, so what else did I listen to? There was Fly on the Wall with Dana Carvey and David Spade, and of course, both being Saturday Night Live veterans. They speak to a lot of people who have guested on Saturday Night Live and bring up their memories and such. Interesting conversation. Some people thought that Dana Carvey is a little bit much on the show, that he's kind of jumping in a little bit too much. I really didn't see it in the interview that I heard with John Lovitz, but he's a comedian, so they're going to take an opportunity when there is one. They're both very funny guys, regardless. A lot of respect for both Dana Carvey and David Spade, and love John Lovitz. Jealous. And there's also The Daily, which is a news program presented by the New York Times. And that was a really interesting one. Again, a lot of political stuff on there. So depending on where your political leanings are, you can check those shows out. Mr. Ballin, who is actually John B. Allen, who is a former Navy SEAL, I believe, and he does a podcast with all creepy stories on it. And I was checking this out. I like this show. It's very different, not heavy on production, just very straightforward, but really creepy stories. And he's gotten very popular in the little mountain that we call Podcastia. Also listened to a whole little section of a podcast called Very Scary People. And this podcast was a miniseries that was 5 episodes long, and it dealt with the Ronald DeFeo murders. Now, if you don't know what the Ronald DeFeo murders are, maybe you've heard of the Amityville Horror. Yes, well, that's the actual murder that took place in that house, and they, debunk all the horror stuff on it. But the case itself was really interesting. I learned a lot of things about it that I did not know. So I thought it was a really thorough and informative podcast about a true crime. And it was hosted by Donnie Wahlberg. And I found out from Sherpa Brother that this podcast was actually a TV show, and they've actually spoken about a lot of other serial killers and other scary people in this world. So I enjoyed it, though. I wish he would just stop talking about New Kids on the Block. He did that the first 2 episodes. It's like, you were on Blue Bloods and you play a detective. Wouldn't you say that on a true crime podcast instead of New Kids on the Block? I don't know. Just a little quibble with it, but otherwise a very enjoyable podcast. I listened to Revolutions, and it talks about that. I know, big shock here. Revolutions throughout the world in different eras. I listened to 2 chapters on the American Revolution. Really straightforward stuff, easy to understand if you're a history buff and you don't want to listen to like a 3-hour long history thing like Hardcore History with Dan Carlin, which is cool. This is a little shorter, a little more concise, but definitely very factual, very entertaining as well. Revolutions is the name of that one. I also listened to The Dollop, and the podcast is about American history too, and it is told by 2 comedians, Daniel and Gareth, and they talk about stories that you probably didn't learn about when you were learning American history. And they make it very entertaining. They're very funny. I really enjoyed the episodes that I was listening to. It was part 1 of 2 about Benedict Arnold. And they really had a lot of fun with this. And I had fun listening to it, too. They definitely made me laugh quite a few times on this. And, I'm a fan of a podcast called Behind the Bastards, which is hosted by Robert Evans. And Robert said that he was heavily influenced by the Dollop in the style of creating his show as well. So, and even the guys from the Dollop appeared on Behind the Bastards in a 6-part episode about Henry Kissinger. And there was a lot of stuff about him that I didn't know either. So it was really cool. So the Dollop, definitely, if you want to learn some history and you want to have some laughs, that's definitely a podcast to check out. And lastly, there is Freakonomics Radio, which is an interview show, which is hosted by a guy that I really enjoy. He's probably one of my favorite interviewers when it comes to podcasts, a man named Stephen Dubner. Stephen is an author. He previously had a little show called Tell Me Something I Don't Know, which was like a game show, sort of, on a podcast. And I really liked hearing it. And it was a lot of trivia and a lot of really interesting facts and stuff. And he's a great interviewer. He spoke with someone about electric cars and how popular they are in the 1890s. Yeah, you heard me right. The 1890s. Check out that episode. And there's a whole bunch of other stuff on Freakonomics Radio. He's been doing it for a while. Always really cool stories like that. So that is your Sherpa Samples. And again, thank you to the 2 guests who phoned in and made a request for a podcast, and you can do the same. Again, my intention is not to review the podcast, but if it's something that I really like, I'll let you know if I like it. I think that's only fair, but I'm not a critic, so no, you don't want me to criticize. No, not one of those things. All right. So back to the show, and let's wrap it up, and let's talk about what's going on at the Sherpa Chalet. So what's going on at the Sherpa Chalet, you may be wondering, or maybe you're not, but I'm going to tell you anyway. Ha ha! Thought you'd escape that. I want to let you know that this season we've passed 200 episodes. I think this is like number 216, number 217. I've interviewed over 200 people, more than most of our episodes because some of them have 2 guests or even 3 guests on some of them. So, yeah, I've been lucky to talk to a whole bunch of people. Thank you all for coming on the show. What else is going on? I can talk to you, too. There is an app out called Wisdom. You can download it for your iPhone or your Android phone, and it is absolutely free to join. There's no subscription fees or anything like that. It's people talking, and the people are talking live. If you have a passion, you can just go on there and speak to people who share your passion. And when I go on, of course, I talk about, yes, that's right, basket weaving. No, I talk about podcasts and I talk about podcasting. And a lot of podcasters come on. And so I'm hoping that some of you out there, the listeners, will join me on this app and we can talk about this show. We could talk about a podcast that maybe you like. That's not my show. And if it's something that I definitely should be having a listen to for the Sherpa Samples, or if it's just something that you're passionate about and you want to talk about it, you can do that too. And if you've got a podcast as well, you can swing by and promote your podcast and we can do like a little mini interview on the Wisdom app. And I've met some really incredible people on there. A nice community. It's not this vicious political thing. It's just friendly people who want to talk about fun stuff and just enjoy themselves. So please join me on the Wisdom app. And also, as I was mentioning, the Swell app. That's not live conversation. That's recorded messages. But if I put out a question, and if it's something like, do you have a podcast you'd like to recommend for me to check out? This is where you can leave me voicemail messages. Just look for Jim the Podcast Sherpa. Do a little search on there, and you can find me. And, oh, yeah, by the way, if I'm on the Wisdom app, 10 o'clock Eastern Standard Time, Wednesday nights, that's been my time slot, I guess we could call it. If you definitely want to look for me and you just kind of scroll through the screens and eventually you will see me and there will be some guy babbling and wondering why people aren't talking to him. They do talk to me eventually. Just they're so quiet sometimes. I don't know. We have to make them noisy. And I know you rebels of the Sherpalution, you guys like to make some noise. So if you can, join me on the Wisdom app or message me on the Swell app as well. You can even leave me a voicemail message through the Anchor app on your phone, or even through my website. What's that website? Sherpalution.com. And Sherpalution, of course, is the word that you need to know to follow me on social media, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and the occasional TikTok. I'm getting a little lax with that, but trust me, I'm looking for good dancing shoes. I don't know. All right, folks, I think it's time for me to get on out of here. Again, thank you so much for letting me do what I do for 8 seasons. And I hope you can kind of catch up with the old shows if you haven't yet, and if you're new to the show. And we hope that you come back next week, because season 9 will be kicking off, and I will be speaking with Dax and Kai. And Dax is a 14-year-old who's going to be 15 probably by the time this episode airs. And he hosts a horror podcast. And these guys have such a passion for movies and for horror. I really enjoyed speaking with them. They were a lot of fun. So check out the episode, as you always do. Thank you so much, Mr. Bruce. I think we can get on out of here. Have a great week, everybody. We will see you next time for the beginning of season 9. And viva la Sherpalution.
Thanks for listening to Too Many Podcasts. Please disperse. You can go home now. I said you can go home now. Viva la Sherpalution. Viva la Sherpalution. Yo, come back now, you hear?